When it comes to horror games, most people think about the jump scares and intense atmosphere, but there's a whole other side to the genre that's just as important: the story. Not all horror games focus on delivering a deep, engaging narrative, but when they do, it takes the experience to a whole new level. Today, we're diving into some of the best story-driven horror games that keep you on the edge of your seat, not just with their scares, but with their unforgettable storytelling. The Vanishing of Ethan Carter stands out from the typical horror game formula. You're not running from monsters or fighting off any creepy creatures here. Instead, the game builds its horror through atmosphere, the eerie vibe that creeps up on you as you explore its beautifully haunting world. It's subtle, but it really gets under your skin in a way that's hard to shake. The storytelling is another area where the game shines. Unlike most games where you're hit with tons of cutscenes or constant dialogue, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter lets the story unfold naturally. As you wander through the game and solve puzzles, pieces of the narrative start to come together. You're searching for a missing boy, Ethan, but things quickly spiral into something far more complex and mysterious. What makes this game even more captivating is how it keeps you engaged without giving too much away at once. You're constantly left wondering what's real and what's not, and that psychological aspect adds another layer of depth to the experience. By the time you reach the end, you realize this isn't just a simple missing person story. It's a twisted, emotional journey that plays with your mind in all the best ways. Bendy and the Ink Machine might look like an innocent, old-school cartoon, with its 1930s style animation reminiscent of classic Mickey Mouse. But don't be fooled, there's something much darker lurking beneath the surface. You play as Henry Stein, a former animator who gets a mysterious invitation back to his old studio by his ex-boss. At first, everything seems familiar, but it doesn't take long for Henry to realize things are far from normal. The place is twisted, overrun by eerie living ink creatures, and some of the once friendly cartoon characters are now out to get him. Throughout 5 intense chapters, you unravel the dark secrets behind the studio, discovering more about what went wrong and why these horrifying creations exist. The story is full of twists and unexpected moments that keep you hooked. What makes it stand out is not just the creepy atmosphere, but the emotional connection you start to feel for Henry's journey. It's a game that blends nostalgia with pure horror in a way that's both disturbing and captivating. What adds to the overall experience is how the game taps into the idea of creativity gone wrong. The very thing Henry used to create the ink is now a source of terror. It's a clever commentary on how art and imagination can take on a life of their own when pushed too far. Observer takes you into a dark and dystopian future where everything seems to have gone wrong. The game is set in the year 2084 in a version of Poland devastated by a digital plague known as the nanophage, which has torn through the population. What makes it even more unsettling is that the country isn't run by a government anymore, but by a giant corporation with its own police force called the Observers. You play as one of these observers, a detective who ends up in the middle of a chilling mystery after being called to investigate his estranged son's apartment. As the story unfolds, you're hit with twist after twist, pulling you deeper into the eerie narrative. What really sets Observer apart, though, is its psychological horror. It's not just about jump scares or monsters. The game constantly makes you question your perception of reality, leaving you wondering what's real and what's just in the mind of your character. This creates a tense, unsettling atmosphere that keeps you on edge throughout the experience. In addition to its gripping storyline, Observer excels in creating an immersive world. The cyberpunk aesthetic is gritty and oppressive, with dark, neon-lit environments that reflect the broken state of society. The combination of eerie visuals, haunting sound design, and a well-paced narrative makes Observer not just a great horror game, but a thought-provoking exploration of a possible future where technology and humanity are at odds. Telltale's The Walking Dead set the stage for a whole new type of story-driven gaming experience. While some might argue whether it truly fits into the horror genre, given its emphasis on narrative over constant scares, the presence of zombies and intense moments can't be ignored. The game's strength lies in its emotional depth, weaving a gripping tale of survival and human connections in a world overrun by the undead. At the heart of the story is Clementine, who starts as a scared little girl, but evolves into one of the most memorable protagonists in gaming. Across its 4 seasons, we see her grow, make impossible choices, and face countless dangers with her ever-changing group of companions. What makes Clementine's journey so engaging is not just the fight against zombies, but her struggle to find safety and a place to call home. This ongoing search keeps the story fresh and emotionally charged from beginning to end. But what really sets The Walking Dead apart is how it makes you, the player, feel like your choices truly matter. Every decision has weight, and even though the narrative has set endpoints, the path you take to get there can feel uniquely yours. It's not just a survival game, it's a deeply personal story about trust, loss, and hope in a world that has lost all of them. The 2023 release of Layers of Fear, despite its somewhat confusing title, is essentially a collection of remakes of the original 2 Layers of Fear games, bundled together with all of their downloadable content. Each game offers its own distinct story, but they all unfold in a similar manner. As the player, you navigate eerie environments in a first-person perspective, uncovering objects that gradually reveal more about your character or the events surrounding them. One of the defining features of these games is how they manipulate your perception. Objects shift when you're not looking, hallways change unexpectedly, and the world around you becomes increasingly disorienting. This constant manipulation creates a psychological horror experience that gets under your skin. It's not about jump scares, it's about messing with your mind in subtle yet unsettling ways. What really makes Layers of Fear stand out is its focus on atmosphere and storytelling. The game thrives on tension and builds its narrative through visual cues and environmental storytelling, pulling you deeper into the protagonist's fractured psyche. The psychological torment is as much a part of the gameplay as it is the narrative, making each playthrough feel immersive and personal. Whether you're a fan of slow burn horror or simply enjoy unraveling complex stories, this game delivers a deeply emotional and terrifying experience. The Cat Lady might not seem complex at first glance, as the gameplay primarily revolves around moving the character and interacting with objects. However, where this game truly excels is in its storytelling. You take on the role of Susan Ashworth, a middle-aged woman battling depression who is given a disturbing mission to eliminate 5 vile individuals. While the premise seems straightforward, the game quickly dives into much darker, more nuanced themes. It tackles heavy subjects like mental health, depression, suicide, and illness, including cancer, but it doesn't just throw them in for shock value. These themes are woven deeply into the story, creating moments that genuinely make you stop and reflect. The way the game presents these issues feels raw and unsettling at times, but it's also incredibly human, making the experience emotionally gripping. One of the most striking things about The Cat Lady is how it deals with isolation and inner demons, not just in the protagonist, but in the people she encounters. It's the kind of game that makes you think about life's struggles long after the credits roll, all while keeping you hooked with its eerie, oppressive atmosphere. It's less about jump scares and more about sinking into the character's despair, making it stand out in the horror genre. Detention is a 2D side-scrolling horror game set in a Taiwanese high school during the 1960s. But this isn't your average school setting. The halls are crawling with terrifying creatures and danger lurks around every corner. Your goal is to survive by avoiding these deadly threats while solving puzzles and uncovering the dark history of the building. Even though it's not a particularly long game, the pacing feels just right. The story slowly unravels, giving you time to get fully immersed in the eerie atmosphere while learning more about the school's disturbing past. It's so well done that the game's narrative has been adapted into both a movie and a TV series, showing just how impactful and compelling the story is. What really makes Detention stand out is the way it blends real-world political history with supernatural horror. The oppressive atmosphere of Taiwan's White Terror period serves as a chilling backdrop, giving the game a deeper, more emotional resonance. As you play, you don't just face scary monsters, you also confront themes of guilt, repression, and fear that make the experience much more haunting. Still Wakes the Deep is a psychological horror game set on an oil rig in the 1970s. Right from the start, things go south pretty quickly, and the rig itself starts to fall apart, creating a tense, claustrophobic atmosphere. To make matters worse, there are these strange, eerie creatures lurking around, adding to the feeling that something truly sinister is at play. Interestingly, the game doesn't rely on combat at all. Instead of fighting the creatures head-on, you'll need to rely on stealth and your wits to outsmart them. The puzzles you come across aren't just there for show either. They actually serve as key moments for you to progress and avoid the lurking threats. What really stands out are the characters you meet along the way. They're not just there to fill the space, they're well written and voice acted in a way that brings the story to life, pulling you deeper into the mystery of what's happening on the rig. What sets Still Wakes the Deep apart from other horror games is its atmosphere. The isolation of being stuck on an oil rig in the middle of the ocean, combined with the ever-present danger, makes the tension almost unbearable at times. The game's focus on storytelling through environmental cues and character interactions adds depth, making it more than just a run-and-hide type of horror. If you're into games where the narrative takes center stage, with a heavy dose of psychological dread, this one's definitely worth checking out. Dead Space has always been more about intense scares and eerie atmosphere than deep storytelling. But the 2023 remake of the original game actually does a great job of making the story stand out. Sure, the main focus is still on the horror and action, but the narrative adds a lot to the overall experience and shouldn't be dismissed. The plot follows Isaac Clarke, an engineer who boards the USG Ishimura, a massive spaceship, to find his girlfriend, Nicole. Things quickly spiral out of control when he encounters terrifying creatures called necromorphs. The story may sound simple, but the remake manages to flesh it out with more emotional depth and character development, making Isaac's journey feel more personal and gripping. On top of that, the environmental storytelling, the way the game uses its surroundings to hint at what's happened, is spot on. It keeps you on edge, not just because of the monsters, but also because of the mystery that unfolds around you. What really sets Dead Space Remake apart, though, is how it balances its horror elements with the storytelling. It's not just about surviving, it's about uncovering the Ishimura's dark secrets and piecing together what happened. That blend of exploration, fear, and a more fleshed out narrative gives the remake a much stronger emotional core compared to the original, which is why it deserves a spot as one of the best story-driven horror games. The Quarry brings together a star-studded cast, including well-known names like Brenda Song and David Arquette, whose top-tier performances breathe life into an already gripping story. Set at a summer camp, the narrative focuses on a group of young counselors who expect to spend just one last night there, but things quickly take a dark turn. While I won't spoil anything, let's just say that mysterious forces soon turn their peaceful evening into a terrifying ordeal. The cool part is, the direction of the story is largely in your hands. You'll be making decisions throughout the game that will determine the fate of each character as the night unfolds. What really sets the Quarry apart is how much control you have over the story's outcome. Every decision feels weighty, and the branching paths lead to multiple endings, which gives it a lot of replay value. The atmosphere of the game is incredibly tense, keeping you on edge the whole time. The character dynamics and the ever-present sense of dread make it a thrilling narrative experience that keeps you hooked from start to finish. Resident Evil games aren't always known for their storytelling, but the 2019 remake of Resident Evil 2 is an exception. The game features a gripping narrative that's split into two parts, an A and B story. To get the complete experience, you need to play through both, as each perspective adds depth to the overall plot. The story takes place during a zombie outbreak in Raccoon City, which quickly devastates the city's population. Leon Kennedy, a rookie cop, and Claire Redfield, who's searching for her missing brother, find themselves trapped in this nightmare. Despite having little experience in dealing with such horrors, they're forced to confront the deadly situation head-on. Along the way, they uncover hidden truths about the outbreak's origins, which keeps the story compelling from start to finish. What makes this remake stand out is how it balances tension and storytelling. While the action is intense, the game never loses focus on its characters. You really feel the weight of the world on Leon and Claire as they push through one terrifying ordeal after another. It's a perfect mix of survival horror and story-driven gameplay that keeps you invested throughout. Alan Wake might not be your typical horror game since it leans heavily into action-adventure, but it still manages to create a deeply unsettling atmosphere. The story follows Alan Wake, a successful novelist struggling with a serious case of writer's block. To shake off the frustration, he and his wife decide to take a trip to the picturesque town of Bright Falls. But things take a turn for the eerie when Alan notices strange occurrences, especially when night falls. The real kicker? He begins to live through events straight out of a manuscript he doesn't even remember writing. This unique setup makes for a surreal, tension-filled experience. The game's narrative plays with the line between reality and fiction in a way that keeps you guessing, blending psychological thriller elements with supernatural horror. Its setting, inspired by classic Twin Peaks-style small towns, adds to the overall sense of isolation and mystery, making you feel as if something is always lurking just out of sight. Plus, with the remastered version, the visuals are even more striking, which only amplifies the tension. It's not just about the action, but about the slow burn creepiness that sticks with you long after you put the controller down. Until Dawn starts with a group of friends returning to the ski lodge where, a year prior, their friends tragically died. They plan to commemorate the anniversary with a weekend getaway, but things quickly take a dark turn. What begins as a reunion soon unravels into a nightmare, setting the stage for a tense, unsettling experience. The game clearly draws inspiration from classic slasher films, and that's intentional. It leans into familiar horror tropes, but what sets Until Dawn apart is the way it tells its story. Your decisions matter here, sometimes in ways you won't even realize until later. The choices you make have a direct impact on who survives and who doesn't, making each playthrough feel unique and personal. The game masterfully uses tension and atmosphere to keep you on edge, combining jump scares with deeper psychological horror. You never really know what's coming next, and that uncertainty makes every decision feel loaded with consequence. The branching narrative, along with its focus on player agency, keeps the story engaging and adds a replayability factor that other horror games often lack. Silent Hill 2 pulls you in right from the start with an intriguing premise. James Sunderland, the main character, receives a letter from his wife, who's supposed to be dead. The letter claims she's waiting for him in the mysterious town of Silent Hill, so naturally he sets off to uncover the truth. What follows is a strange, twisted narrative, and it's considered one of the best ever told in the horror genre. The game doesn't just rely on its story, though. Silent Hill 2 keeps you on edge with clever scares and an intense, haunting atmosphere that stays with you long after you put the controller down. The blend of psychological horror and unsettling visuals creates a deeply immersive experience, making you question what's real and what's a nightmare. Silent Hill 2 is more than just a game. It's a journey into the depths of grief and guilt, and that emotional weight makes the story hit even harder. Alan Wake 2 cranks up the horror factor compared to the original, with more intense jump scares and an overall creepier atmosphere. This time, you get to play as two different characters. Alan Wake, the well-known protagonist, is trapped in a nightmarish alternate dimension full of shadowy creatures. On the other side, there's Saga Anderson, an FBI agent who's still grounded in the real world, though she's dealing with plenty of eerie happenings herself while trying to solve a complex murder case. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the mystery is much deeper and more intricate than it first appears. The pacing keeps you hooked, revealing bits of the truth at just the right moments, so you're always eager to see what happens next. The characters are well developed, and the dialogue adds a lot to the overall experience, pulling you further into the strange world. What makes Alan Wake 2 stand out even more is its psychological horror elements. The way the game blurs the lines between reality and fiction messes with your mind, making you question what's real alongside the characters. It's a game that keeps you on edge, not just with scares, but with its mind-bending narrative twists. If you're into story-driven games that make you think as much as they make you jump, Alan Wake 2 delivers on all fronts. The Last of Us Part 1 may be an action-adventure game at its core, but the heavy presence of horror elements earns it a solid spot in the horror genre. And when it comes to the story, it's not just good. It's one of the most captivating narratives in all of gaming, no matter the category. The plot follows a man and a young girl as they make their way through a dangerous post-apocalyptic world with the goal of getting the girl to safety. The concept sounds straightforward, but what makes it shine is the deep and evolving relationship between the two main characters. Their interactions, filled with emotional highs and lows, are what truly drive the story forward. The incredible voice performances by Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson also add a ton of weight and believability to their roles. Beyond the main story, the game excels in its ability to immerse players in its bleak world. The attention to detail in both the environments and the emotional complexity of the characters elevates the storytelling to another level. It's a game that sticks with you, not just because of the harrowing journey, but because of the bonds you form with the characters along the way. Soma has a lot going on with puzzle solving, sneaking away from enemies, and exploring, but the real highlight is the story. Right from the start, you meet Simon Jarrett, who goes in for a brain scan and suddenly finds himself waking up in this creepy underwater research facility, a setting you don't come across very often in games. He's super confused about how he ended up there, so he sets out to figure it all out. But the story isn't just about that initial mystery. It dives much deeper, pushing you to think about consciousness and what it really means to be alive. Throughout the game, you get these heavy themes that linger in your mind long after you've played. It's not just a horror game, it's a journey that makes you reflect on life and existence, leaving you with questions that might stick with you for a while. Soma really masterfully blends horror with these thought-provoking ideas, making it a unique experience in the genre.